Welcome to the Energizing America podcast, where we talk all things energy. Excited to sit down today with Chris, who I had the pleasure of hearing several moderated conversations at the Better in Our Backyard conference, which recently took place in Minnesota. Fascinating conversation. Chris is with the National Investor, and you got to catch him online, and we'll get some of those details here at the end, Chris. But welcome, and thanks for taking the time to sit down with me today. Let's kind of dive right in. Tell us who Chris is and why in the world did we hear you at the Better in Our Backyard conference?
Well, I'll give you the Cliff Notes of the Cliff Notes version of that, Shane. First of all, I've been in the financial business and investment world for pretty much my entire adult life. Most of it was in the retail end of things, but even when I started out, I love to write, I love to speak, I love to educate people. And so I've been doing a newsletter since the early 1980s. Called the National Investor. It's under that name in its present format since 1996. So next year will be 30 years for the National Investor. I do my own podcast called Your Money Today. I'm on many other people's podcasts by invitation, such as yours, because like my motto says at the National Investor, you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And so what I try and do, we're inundated with information, as you well know, Shane. We can keep ourselves shackled 24/7 to our phone or our iPad or our laptop or whatever, and not even scratch the surface of the volume of stuff that's out there. So what I've done for a lot of years is to show people how to take all of the news and information that's out there, distill it into an understandable form that helps you understand where the economy is going, where interest rates are going, the markets, and so forth. And segueing into natural resources, I've been of the understanding for a long time that the U.S. has done a very bad thing over the years. It wasn't just T-shirts and doodads and Christmas toys and electronics that we outsourced to China and Bangladesh and other places over the years. It was uranium and rare earth magnets. And even as we found out during COVID, most of our pharmaceuticals and even supplies. Who realized until then, when we had another big wake-up call, that we can't even meet our own needs for stuff like that in the U.S. So the whole regimen of globalization, which was run by big banks and big corporations whose only allegiance really is to their shareholders and their bottom line. They have no national allegiance per se. Generally speaking, of course, it was all about the bottom line. And so that was why over many years, they all set up shop. China was built not by the Chinese, but by London, by Wall Street, by, corporate America, because that was where the money was in having these low cost places for labor, for manufacturing and so forth. And now we're paying the price. Because now the Frankenstein monster's creation wants to be on his own and lord it over the Dr. Frankenstein. It's not going real well for us. So that's why we're in what I've, for some time now, called a World War III over commodities and currencies. There's all different kinds of moving parts to that, from the U.S. losing its global empire since we've had, basically since the end of World War II. Now the world is fragmenting. In some ways it needs to. In some ways we're going to be better off in the end, but it's going to be pretty messy getting from point A to point B. And along getting from point A to point B, Shane, I'm trying to help people to get their heads around what the job is that needs to be done so that America doesn't end up with its pants down in years to come, like we have seen with uranium, with rare earths, with antimony, with tungsten, with titanium, and with the pharmaceutical products.
Well, break that down a little bit, Chris, because I think that's so fascinating and so relevant. Like the globalization, when I was going to high school, was the big thing was learn Chinese. And in fact, many of the kids who are even in college, like they're sponsored trips to go over to China and learn how they're doing things and make your investment in China, make your investment in China. They'll take care of us. And you're thinking, well, that just seems kind of sketchy. And everyone even full well knew that there was a national security risk that came with, but nobody fully acknowledged it or dealt with it. But breaking it down a little further, to the average American, what does that mean that there's implications to get from point A to point B? Or even more importantly, why won't we just keep doing what we're doing? What's the harm in it?
Well, that's a multi-part answer as well. Okay. Um, I am all in favor of fair trade. The planet's a very small place. Technology has made it even smaller. Transportation has made it smaller. And I don't have anything against, generally speaking, trading with other nations, especially if they're friendly and share our values. But what we have found is, and there's way more subject matter than we have time to talk about today, but trying to keep it general and simplified. Financially, the world is in a lot of trouble. Okay, and a lot of people that focus on extractive industries, for example. And there's, oh, goody, President Trump signed this executive order and we're going to speed up permitting. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Well, if you look at his first seminal executive order from March, within it were the two reasons it's not going to be enough. Reason number one is that it's subject to the appropriation process. Now, we have seen the Energy Department or the Defense Department, chiefly one or the other of those most of the time, invest in or loan money to different projects. It's a pimple on a flea compared to what is needed to really gain back control, reinvigorate our own mining industry, all of the downstream things where we let China corner the market on a technology, etc. We don't have the ability within the federal budget to do anything remotely close to what is needed, which is why, and these are subjects for another day, or I can give you some other guest ideas. This is why I'm behind a National Infrastructure Bank initiative. It's why some of the overtures we just saw in the news a week ago by the Defense Department to some private equity firms. That's why that's important, because this isn't going to be done through the federal government or through the federal budget process, except in some isolated cases, which again, I got nothing against those, but they're not enough. So our big problem in the world is debt. And we all know where we want to get to. We want to get to a place and need to get to a place where America is not dependent on China or anybody, for that matter, for things that we need for everyday life. If we want to bargain on some things where we've got a good enough agreement, okay, fine. I mean, look, out of necessity, unless it blows up at the last minute, as you and I are recording this, tomorrow, President Trump and President Xi are going to get together. And if the early news reports are legit, okay, we need rare earth magnets. We can't do it here. So China's going to relent on that. We're going to relent on some technology transfers and some tariffs. China might buy some more soybeans. But this morning, as we're recording this, it was announced that they bought the first bunch of soybeans they have in quite a while from the U.S. So both sides, have got reasons to try and stand down. But long term, we really do need to build up our own industries again, so we're not dependent on them. And people tolerated it for so many years, Shane, to get to your original question, simply because of cost. If a pair of sneakers or a TV is going to cost me half of what it is if I bought it from a made in America place, well, I'll buy it from China or from Bangladesh or Vietnam or whatever. So in a way, Americans have been hypocrites. I think a lot of it's ignorance on a part of the population. Half the people don't even care where things are made. They just know that the paycheck's got to stretch a little bit more. And so we'll buy the cheap imports. But the price for that has gotten a little bit too high, and it's caused this renewed national discussion.
And I think this national discussion is so timely because people are more aware of where their products are sourced from and where they're coming from. And like now is the time for us to capitalize on this in the sense of an information share. You said information is everywhere, but knowledge isn't. And I think that's so relevant, even where the raw goods that we need, what they turn into. You and I were at an expo recently about Better in Our Backyard, where it was specific to mining and energy. And ultimately, that's a backbone of everything we're consuming. If you don't have the resource, you're not going to get the product. And so if we're handicapped to get the product from somewhere else because they have the resource, and that person turns out not to be a friendly nation, and or a COVID happens and we can't get it, boy, goodbye America. And dumbing that down means goodbye to your tennis shoes, goodbye to your cell phone, goodbye to your EV vehicle, goodbye to all of these things that are really quite important. And even in the energy space, talking about like, folks, oh, well, we can't drill for oil and gas, we can't use it, it's harmful to the environment, all these things. But they actually do want to stay warm up in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan,
Right.
the whole, most of the US, as they've even experienced down in Texas, want to stay warm. A couple of years ago with the winter storm that they had, that all the ice and several folks passed away. It's actually critical, right? And so we cannot stop marrying the reality with the idea. And so the idea is, well, we want everything at the bottom barrel price. Well, then the reality is you're going to be dependent on other countries. And so what that middle ground is, I'm not exactly certain, but I think marrying the reality to the result is super important. And that's what I learned at the several of the conversations you moderated. Even copper. Here I was thinking, well, great, America has all the copper reserves. I personally live in a spot that sits on one of the biggest copper reserves in the world, and we can't mine it because of our legislative setup in the state of Minnesota is so against mining, and we just can't make progress. Well, come to find out, even if we made progress in getting a copper mine in northern Minnesota, even the refining of copper is what do they call it, where they ship it over to China,
Well, China's got modern smelters. We have two smelters in the U.S. We used to have many times that. Fortunately, there are some technologies that are starting to take hold. Gunnison Copper down in Arizona is starting to deploy one of those in partnership with the Rio Tinto subsidiary, where they use a form of leaching that doesn't require smelting. But yeah, I mean, it's a capital intensive, it's labor intensive, it's material intensive to make all of this stuff work. And people need to understand that. They also need to understand that nobody does it better than the US and Canada. I mean, this isn't even a requirement in the US, but for example, in Canada, which has got some of the strictest environmental and social license and other controls of any country in the world, takes a long time for permitting, unfortunately, like in the US. But even if a Canadian listed company is in a small South American country where the local laws aren't as stringent on that, they're still bound at least somewhat by Canadian standards to do this. And I think that's one of the things people need to get their head around. A lot of people forget, and some of the investment tutorials I've done over time, Shane, I say that some of the best investment ideas I've ever come up with have been watching movies, looking at the popular culture around me, what's new, what's going on. Do you remember the movie Blood Diamond?
No.
Leonardo DiCaprio was one of the stars in a movie called Blood Diamond, and it was a dramatization of a real life thing where in parts of Africa there were literally wars and killings over the control of diamonds that were mined in some of these countries. And this was going on for years, still does, maybe less than it did. Well, anyway, because of, in part, what that movie brought to the popular consciousness, you had in Canada something invented called the Kimberley process. And this was about the time that Canada, back in the late 90s, was starting to become relevant on the global diamond market. Canada never had any diamond mines until about 20, 25 years ago, whatever it's been now. So the Kimberley process was where you can have a microscopic tattoo that you can't see with the naked eye. Put a laser puts a tattoo on a diamond, and that diamond would sell for a premium through jewelers because people knew the source of that diamond. All right. Well, since then, and a lot of people don't know this because I think a lot of the companies have not done a good job in explaining this to people. Now you've got in critical metals, base metals, even country of origin type thing. We hear of country of origin sometimes for certain products, but this has been going on for a while. I'll give you a great example of this. A company that I follow for years, that I've known the management for literally a couple of decades or longer, Avino Silver and Gold Mines. They're on the New York Stock Exchange, they're on Toronto. Their major asset is a producing silver and copper mine, primarily down in Durango, Mexico. Okay. And about a year ago, they had a little ceremony where they donated to the local schools a whole bunch of Samsung flat screen TVs, tablets, things like that for the school. Because in those Samsung TVs and tablets and phones and whatnot were minerals that came from their mine in Durango. Because Samsung several years ago said to Avino, we're going to buy all your concentrate because we like your labor standards, we like how you treat the workers, we like how you treat the community. So this kind of thing has started to get off the ground a little bit, to start to put, not nearly enough, okay, but it has started to get off the ground, Shane, to help people to understand that, you know what, if we really believe what we say as a country, we want to be stewards of the environment. And the environmentalists especially need to be beaten over the head with this, because, you know, their protests lead to the opposite of what they claim they want. We want first world standards. We want first world wages paid. We want first world engineering and whatnot to be brought to bear as we produce these things we need in the world. And so the Avino example is great. You know, Apple, Samsung, and others, you know, when you're holding up your phone, I mean, you got a smartphone in your hand. There's like 30 some odd different metals and minerals in that phone. They came from someplace. They didn't fall out of the sky. Okay.
Right. And I think that's matching the reality to the end use, that if you're using this product, the minerals came from somewhere. I love the country of origin thing. And as you're talking about it, I'm just thinking how many people down in Minneapolis, St. Paul, if they actually knew as they were grabbing their steering wheel that steel that made the car was literally taken from, 2 hours north of them or 3 hours north of them, would think differently when they see that iron ore mining and what it does for their own state.
You know, before you hit the record button, I mentioned my cartoonist and some of the stuff he's done back when, and I know they try to dance around the explanation of why they did this, but when, near where my kids live in northern Wisconsin, every winter you have the American Birkebeiner. Okay. And the Birkebeiner board a while back decided, well, we don't want Enbridge as a sponsor anymore. We don't want them as a sponsor. We don't need their money. Okay. So I come up, and I can't draw a stick figure, but I can come up with some pretty clever ideas, and my cartoonist can draw the thing. So the one frame we have is you've got all of these people in their ski garb. You got the helmet, the goggles, the skis, the ski poles, the gloves, the jackets, the whole deal. Okay. And we don't want to have anything to do with fossil fuels. It's the wrong message. We want to be good stewards of the earth. The next frame is these same skiers without anything on their body having to do with fossil fuels. So you got a fig leaf covering their nether regions. You've got a couple of saplings that they cut from the woods for their ski poles, etc. You got cattails for binding around their bare feet on a piece of wood. Because hey, if you're gonna be that way, be honest about it. I'm all for a sensible debate over conservation, over proper environmental practices. Okay, something I don't even hear the environmentalists talk about enough is that the U.S. with 7% of the world's population, we use nearly 25% of the globe's energy every day.
And that's staggering. That is a staggering statistic.
It is staggering, and we need to be better at that. So I don't question any of that. But a lot of these people that are out there just blindly protesting don't understand they're protesting against a good life that we have because of energy, the number of lives that have been saved. I mean, you've got over 2 billion people on this planet that can't flip a light switch. They're going to cook tonight's meal over dried cow dung. And what about them? So, I've been a believer for a long time, Shane, not to get too conspiratorial, that a lot of these people are put up by people who actually benefit from the lack of development in some countries and from development and production being bottled up in first world countries like the U.S.
Well, how else can you explain the gap in the desire? If you live a good life, that you wouldn't want other folks to live a good life? How can you explain this gap that here in America, we're consuming 25% of the world's energy, but we're trying to tell other countries that they're not allowed to actually have energy?
And
And by the way,
frankly,
we're telling ourselves we can't have access to that we need to do less. New
yeah,
York just banned gas stoves. And I was on the phone with a gentleman from Washington yesterday who said, hey, I got to buy my furnace for my house, my boiler, by the end of the year because the standards for antifreeze change in the beginning of the year. Like basically, they just don't want you to have a boiler. They want you to have everything a natural gas boiler and
right.
propane one. They want you to have an electric one. How else can you explain that gap other than some conspiracy theory? Because it's so unreasonable, and especially when we're not talking about the consumption. I've said for a long time, and we talk about this as a team, that we need to, rather than getting into the emotional debate, because believe you me, I can get into the emotional debate behind it. I have, the pleasure of working with over 300 of the best people in the United States of America, energizing from all across the U.S. And in that job, I have met tens of thousands of more people who are not just benefiting, but thriving as a result of
Yeah.
natural resources that we have access to in America. So I can get into the emotional debate, but ultimately, if we can just talk about from meeting people where they're at, like, okay, Mrs. Protester or Mr. Protester, I understand you think that we shouldn't be drilling, we shouldn't be mining. What are you willing to give up?
Yeah.
What do you stop consuming? What are you going to stop doing? And when you pose that question to them, it oftentimes we can reframe the conversation and start over. That how can we do this? Because it is unreasonable that to get copper mining going in northern Minnesota or any kind of mining. I think one of the presenters at this expo where I met you, 28 years in, $450 million roughly that they've invested, and they have yet to put something in the ground economically viable.
Well, at North Met specifically, one of the places you're undoubtedly talking about, I first set foot on that ground personally 25 years ago this last June. Was my first visit to North Met. And at the time, that project had just changed hands from one little Canadian junior to another company called Polymet. And I followed the story for all those years, stayed in touch with management. I recommended them for one stretch where the stock price did really well, had sense enough to tell people to sell it before everything crashed in 2008. And after that, traded in and out of it a couple of different times. And then in 2010 or 11, I visited the former Duluth Metals, which now is a Twin Metals project. Duluth Metals ended up being taken out completely by Antofagasta, which is the South American company that now owns that project. And likewise, and that's even a much higher grade. Unfortunately, not to get too deep in the weeds and geology and stuff, it's on the wrong side of the Laurentian divide to hear the geologists and environmentalists talk about it. So that's one more roadblock that they have. But yeah, I mean, here again, you've got the means in this day and age to mine these things safely with umpteen sets of eyes looking over your shoulder, do it right, and be able to meet our needs within our own four walls. And I think it's here again, it's foolhardy from an economic and national security perspective for people to just blindly say, oh, no, we don't want this in our country. Okay. I mentioned earlier, too, people have got to be forced to give an answer. Well, where do we get these things? For example, I had a article I did a while back when the Congo was in the press over a bunch of different things, and Joe Biden doesn't want mining here, but he was trying to ink a new deal with the Democratic Republic of the Congo for battery metals. So I've got a slide with Greta Thunberg, the Swedish girl that's the global scold, and her trademark scowl on her face. You've stolen my childhood. And in the frame next to that, a bunch of little kids in the Congo up to their necks in mud and chemicals. And one of them, the caption is, gee, we're all broken up about that. Okay. So people who just knee jerk are against that in the US should be made to answer for why are you consigning that kid or kids to that kind of a life? Are you the modern plantation owners? You don't want stuff done here, but you'll have your cobalt plantation in the Congo, your copper plantation someplace in South America. where you don't have to see how the sausage is made. You can virtue signal like, oh, we don't have mining here. Well, it's happening someplace.
Yep. So
Okay.
unless you stop consuming,
Yeah. Unless you stop consuming, shut up.
yeah. Well, so and I wish we could get that literally that simple message out there that either stop consuming or shut up, because it's pretty concise, and it's the reality. But it makes me ponder, and really throughout the conference about mining and energy specifically, I kept going back to, there's an economic deal here, and then there's the social, and so on. But in order to get mining completed and energy out to market, raw product out to market, there's a large investment required.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that investment, you mentioned at the beginning, you're an advocate for some sort of a federal bank that could potentially invest in these things, and boy, it would be wonderful if we could get there. Where I'm wondering is, from an investment standpoint, for your average investor out there, why would they make an investment into these natural resource mines and so on, when the political will and the return on that investment takes so long to see? Is it still something that you recommend people to keep their eye on even?
Oh, that's a great and insightful question, Shane, because it's part of the reason why we're in the predicament that we're in. Because with all of the impediments, regulatory wise, environmental wise, the costs and everything like that, it isn't any wonder that when you look even in Canada, and I may get the number a little bit off, but this is just give you an indication, because in many ways Canada and the US have mirrored one another. And notwithstanding the fact that Canada's, their natural resources are a much larger percentage of their economy and prospective economy than what we have in the US. But the issue is that you had for years investment houses, the big investment banks, brokerage firms and stuff. They have divisions and experts that you've got an analyst that covers XYZ company. You got an analyst that covers the oil and gas sector. You've got an analyst that covers the gold sector, the copper sector, nuclear energy, whatever. And for so many years, as commodities suffered through, a bear market more often than not, and the added push going back for a generation or longer to outsource all of these things, to not produce them in our own backyard, especially where the US is concerned, but in South America and Asia and Africa and whatnot. What happened? All of these outfits dropped their coverage. And in Canada, where oil and gas are still a big part of the equation economically, you had something like 24 investment houses in Canada that had entire desks that dealt with energy, fossil fuels. And now you're down to like 3 right now. Now they're starting to bring those back, and I'm seeing signs even in the US in the brokerage industry and among investment advisors and whatnot that the coverage of these extractive industries is starting to recover, but it's going to take years for people to get back in. So you've had every disincentive to investment that you could throw at these industries for a long time. And it's not going to be fixed overnight. It's not being fixed now nearly enough, in my opinion. I mean, a lot of people, and I got some heat for it from some of my friends that are CEOs of nickel companies or copper companies, because I put out something earlier this year saying, hey, wait a minute. I think it's wonderful that President Trump just issued this executive order that we're going to speed up permitting and do this and that to foster greater mineral production in this country. But he doesn't have a magic wand to achieve all of that any more than Joe Biden had a magic wand to have us all have an EV in every garage. You got to have policy with it. The economics has got to work. So many other things have got to work. And look, nothing against the president and what he's done, especially recently with nuclear energy, especially recently with the MP materials deal, which we're going to quibble over the legality of this and whether the U.S. government should be a private equity fund. Okay. And there's good arguments on both sides, but the outcome of it, the legality and constitutionality aside, shows the formula of what the U.S. has to do, but multiplied by thousands beyond the MP materials deal. Getting back to the pricing thing we talked about a few minutes ago, Shane, And this is what I said back early in the year when he put out this executive order. Well, that sounds great, but that and $8 will get you an overpriced cup of coffee at Starbucks. Okay, that executive order, even if tomorrow all the permits were in place for NorthMet, you still can't build it. The nickel price is too low. The copper price is too low. The labor is not there to do all of this. We need to get serious fast about how we're going to put all these building blocks in place, because the platitudes from the Trump administration and those of us who think that it's about time that we cede these industries, those platitudes aren't going to get us any farther than Biden's platitudes, all this green crap he's trying to sell, when he didn't have the infrastructure in place for that either.
Right. That's a very excellent point, Chris. And I think even bringing it just home here for like us at Westcom, we were just up at up in Silver Bay, Minnesota. There's a mine, and we got crews there often. That's dirty, difficult, hard work, right? To make that product, to extract the product and get it out to market. And that's really not an easy fix to the difficulty in that and labor force. And I was just really struck recently as to how often some of these mines have to have like continual onboarding people, because they're cycling people, because it's such a tough environment, and in a country where you can kind of go anywhere and do anything. And who wants to sign up for the industry that's
right.
negatively, pushed throughout? So that's a really hard sell. What are some of the things on your mind about those building blocks that are necessary beyond financing?
Well, beyond the financing, I mean, one of the good things that the president had specifically in one of his executive orders on nuclear energy was a specific provision for the kind of training for the specialty fields that you need to have for this. What I like about the National Infrastructure Bank bill that was just reintroduced in the House of Representatives again back a month or so ago is that also provides for this. Mike Rowe, most of us have heard of him. He does a program, Dirty Jobs, and I saw him at a presentation sometime back, and he was going down a list with a lot of specifics of, engineering, well field engineers, well field geologists, hard rock geologists, mining engineers, and so forth. We have not trained people like that in anywhere near the kind of numbers that we need to bring these industries back. Now, the point I made about NorthMet, a year or so ago, I was chairing a panel at another conference that's put on by the SME in New York City, where I go, pretty much every year in the spring. They have their conference, and you would find it similar to what you saw in the Twin Cities with Better in Our Backyard. And one of the smartest and most connected guys in the mining industry, generally in the copper industry specifically, was on my panel, a guy named Adam Hawkins, who you may have seen at the conference. He was on one of the panels I did there in Minnesota as well. And he made the point at this other conference a year ago, and we may even have repeated it, if I remember correctly, that, and he was talking in that context of the development stage and construction ready projects that are still stymied in Arizona. So you got, Arizona Sonora's project, you've got Resolution, et cetera, 3 or 4 of the big ones that are development stage. They've already got a discovery, they've already got a resource. And the point he made was much the same thing. He said that if tomorrow somebody had waved the magic wand, these things were all permitted and all ready to go, you still can't do it because there's 3,000 some odd people in specialized fields needed, and they ain't there. I mean, you look even in the oil patch, oil and gas industry in the U.S., which in relative terms is healthier because we've got an abundance, especially of natural gas in this country, some of the cheapest natural gas in the world, and outside of basically Canada and Russia. Okay. And even in that industry, the average age of the workforce is pushing 60.
Yeah, I just, as part of an employee-owned company, you have to get your business valued every year. And in this 100+ page report, it talks about some of those demographics. And they were all excited. And the last one that we got this year, the average age had decreased half a year. It's still 57 and a half years old. And that's not sustainable, folks. It's not gonna work.
we need a major industrial policy in this country that encompasses all of these things. You know, I want to quote, and I often refer to this lady, Marcy Kaptur from the state of Ohio, is a Democrat member of Congress. She's the longest serving woman and Democrat both in the House of Representatives right now. So she comes from, blue collar, plain vanilla district in Ohio, and most of her career she's been all about, the traditional Democrat talking points, labor, industry, our own backyards, common sense, not all of the modern tutti frutti kind of stuff that they've added to that. All right. And she gave a special order speech some years back on the floor of the House. And for anybody that's ever watched these things, if you turn on C-SPAN during the day where they have the House of Representatives live, all right, you can get up and vent your spleen on anything for usually it's 5 minutes, So this congressman or woman gets up, talks about the little league team in their district, just won the, the championship or whatever. This one gets up, talks about the heartbreak of psoriasis, whatever. Well, she got up, and I wish this should be a required 5-minute soundbite for everybody in industry and government and so forth. Because basically what she said, Shane, was that the U.S. is in serious trouble because we have no long-term energy policy in this country. And we see it today. Republicans get in, it's drill, baby, drill. The Democrats get in, but they want to kill the fossil fuel industry. The irony is that during the Biden, Harris, Janet Yellen, overseeing of our fossil fuel industry, oil hit an all-time high production. Now we've got drill, baby, drill in there, and we're starting to roll over hard as far as production. Those are for reasons it's the subject of another program. Okay. But we're always by the seat of our pants and by whatever somebody's, policy wish list is. All right. And her point was, we need to have something no less serious than the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II to rebuild Europe. We need to have something no less serious than the space program and everything that went into that. And with all of these by the seat of your pants things, and we'll send out this, we'll put out this great sounding executive order. And again, not that it's not well-intentioned, not that it's not good stuff, but we're bringing a water pistol to a gunfight.
Yeah, and I don't see that changing. That's the worst part of it, is that I really had some conversation at some of the side conversations at that expo about how this is why the Chinese and some of the socialistic countries or dictatorships can get more progress economically and viably, is because they can have one mission, right?
That's
Anyone in business or following financial markets knows that that's really important. Well, in America, in a democracy, it's wonderful. We can all vote, but if we're directing our electorship to follow these extremisms, then we're going to get this psychoticness, right? And anytime there's psychoticness, it's hard to get progress.
Exactly right.
It's fine to go ahead and vote according to the way you believe and so on, but once policy starts following, and we allow policy to be whipsawed, and even back to the building blocks required to get this to the next level. If we, frankly, in the oil and gas sector, in the energy sector, give us a liberal Congress, give us a liberal president, and watch us make some hay, because we can make some good money in that environment. Really, really good money, looking for skilled people. We hire them up, and then it's immediately, once a conservative situation takes over, we start seeing a decrease. We've lost at least 20% of our work, and the optimism in our energy space is not good right now compared to what it was when Biden was in. Those are just cold, hard facts. But what happens then? People leave the industry. The industry. And now when the tide shifts and back in and prices come back up and the energy sector is all of a sudden loved again, guess what? We don't got people. So then that just drives the price even further up. And then, the tide shift. So I wish somehow we could get the messaging better to the electors out here that, hey guys, that's fine to have your deep-seated beliefs and so on, but from a policy perspective, I got to go watch this video because I think I would like it. From a policy perspective, we got to have a consistent plan. And it really should be based on our national security interests, and then what's the best way to economically get it.
Well, and sound economics. Yeah, exactly. And look, it's not like it's all bad. I don't want to paint a worse picture than it is. Nuclear energy is one of the best stories out there right now. Everybody has finally gotten their head around this and realized that for the burgeoning needs globally for ever more electricity, there is no better source for 24/7 reliable grid power than to add substantially to our mix of nuclear energy. And that's going to keep natural gas in the game big time as well. Those are going to be the two big ones. Coal flatline, it's not going to go anywhere. Oil will probably diminish somewhat, but not very much. And that's the thing that a lot of the people have not still addressed is that our needs for all of these things go up constantly. We don't have an energy transition going on. We have an ongoing energy addition in our economy and in the world. And where's it going to come from? And it's going to take some smart people who leave their wokeness and opinions left or right on the side and get together, roll up their sleeves and use facts, figures, math, geology, engineering, and say, okay, where is our power going to come from in 20 years? And how do we get there?
And I think
you move heaven and earth to make it happen because, and again, it's not perfect in a lot of ways, but I go back to this MP materials deal recently that the Defense Department did with MP materials in California over rare earth production and magnets. Whatever you want to say about that should have been done a different way or whatnot, that is the model for the industrial policy, however it comes about, that we need in the U.S. We need a guaranteed price. We need the government as a big brother to make sure these things happen and that they're not delayed by stupid stuff. I mean, there's still multiple layers of environmental things, water, soil, all of this kind of stuff. That's all legit, but you don't do it over and over and over again like NorthMed has had to suffer through for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, you're not going to get progress. Right. So I think going forward, several things on my mind here and this is a cool part about talking with like-minded individuals who want a result rather than opinions, right? I think we're hitting that we want the same result. We want an economically viable way to get the products we need, and we want to do it socially and responsibly. What better spot than right here in America, where we have all of these things, and frankly, we even have the financial resources to do it, right? It's just the political willpower on the fringes that's holding us back. We could go on for hours about this, but what somebody who's in the investment space and seeing all of this, you've told me some optimism because with some of the executive orders and in this extractive industries becoming more followed by the financial markets and so on, if you're talking to one of your wonderful grandchildren that you were telling me about, which you have many, and I say congrats and kudos, and by the way, we need more of them. What are you telling them about the natural resources space in America? How can we bring it down to their level and tell them they should believe in where we're headed? We just attended that conference. Did you leave more optimistic or more pessimistic, and where are we headed?
Well, you get them to have an early appreciation for everything that they have in their life. Everything that we use in our life is either mined or grown by and large. Okay. And so you give them an appreciation for that. You give them a respect for that. And you give people the mindset, I think, to be good stewards of what God has given us on this earth, not to abuse it, not to overuse it. And we do overuse a lot of things in this country, like I said earlier, no question about that. But we need to do a better job. We need to do better maybe than past generations did on so many of these things. But from a more mercenary standpoint, Shane, I took a few of my grandchildren. I've had a bunch of them have been in the Sudan mine, which is now a park up there in the northern Minnesota. So they've seen how people lived and mined and stuff years ago. They've been to Polymet or NorthMet. I still call it Polymet. They've been to NorthMet before. And one of my grandsons, I encourage all of my children to look at these. I've had a few of my grandchildren to better in our backyard functions to meet people and see what this part of the economy is like. And one of them in particular, when he learned that part of what he could go to work for in the mining industry is he'd be able to blow up stuff. He thought that was great. I'm on board with that, he said. But no, and this is going to be, and it's going to be over many years. This is going to be, if we play our cards right, an up and coming part of our future as Americans. And if we put all of the pieces together right, and my prediction is that near term we will not, and we're going to have to suffer more before the critical mass comes and we realize that we've got to multiply the MP materials thing many, many times and to have a much broader industrial and economic policy than anything that has been done so far. We have the opportunity to have an economic era rivaling the Industrial Revolution. We could have great growth and prosperity in this country. All the new jobs that will be created will be much better paying jobs than what a lot of people have right now. It'll help fill in this middle that's widened, where you've got 2 or 3% of the people with all the wealth and the income, and you got, 60% of our population lives paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of the reasons for that is that we have not done the right job in making sure that we have trade schools and other opportunities available for people to step into these industries that we're now trying to resurrect, but with no people to work them.
Exactly. A hospitality industry does not replace a trade industry from an economic standpoint. It doesn't work. Chris, if people want more information, because the energy and the knowledge you have, and I love your tagline about there's knowledge, there's information, but there's not knowledge. Where do we find you and how can we stay in touch?
Very easy. Go to nationalinvestor.com and just follow the yellow brick road. On the front page, you'll see a bunch of my general commentaries on a lot of different subjects, kind of on a rolling basis. You can follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter. The links are all right there on my website as well. You can sign up for a free email list where you get a lot of my general information like we talked about today. And then there's also information there where people can subscribe and be a paid subscriber and get all of my specific investment recommendations.
Awesome. Well, Chris, keep up the good work and not just moderating at these conferences, but getting out there and sharing the knowledge because we need it. And it's been a pleasure to chat with you and take care. We'll talk to you.
Yeah.